Good day, everyone, and welcome to Group 7's presentation. My name is Hakim, and today with my fellow groupmates Letitia, Radif, Ronan, and Ismail, we will cover the third and fourth chapter of the book, which is titled Focus on Interest, Not Positions, and Invent Options for Mutual Gain. Here are some of the topics I will discuss. And so the chapter begins with a story of two men arguing over a position in the library. One demanding the window to be open, while the other demands for it to be closed. As their arguments prolonged, with no clear results, the librarian came and asked the two men's intentions. One said they wanted to be open to gain fresh air, while the other wants it closed to avoid drafts. As they both argue over a position, reaching an agreement may seem distant, but then the librarian focuses on the interest and solves the problem by opening a window on another room, fulfilling both of their interests. As explained in the previous case, usually negotiation is conducted on the basis of standing opposition, whereas in factual, the problem resides on the difference of interests. As negotiators, we need to understand the needs, the desires, the concerns, and overall context in order to establish an agreement. By examining both your and opposed actual interests, we may realize that there might be some other interests that are aligned with each other, and some other ones that might actually be different. But by recognizing and being upfront of the similarities in interest, it may complement the other different interests and become the foundation of your agreement. But then the question arises, how do you actually identify interest? Simply by asking yourself why and why not a basic decision is made will help you get an understanding of how they perceive things from their point of view. As negotiators, we need to analyze our opposing interests to better understand what might be the reason behind their position, as it will then formulate into an agreement or a solution. It will also help you picture the consequences and what could possibly happen in the future if that is the choice you're going to make. As a negotiator, we also need to realize the amount of different interests. Taking account all the interests is something the negotiator needs to do in order to achieve a well-established agreement.
So, the most powerful interests are basic human needs. Basic human needs include security, economic well-being, a sense of belonging, and recognition control over one's life. As fundamental as they are, basic human needs are easy to overlook. In many negotiations, we tend to think that the only interest involved is money. Yet, even in a negotiation over a monetary figure, such as the amount of alimony to be specified in a separation agreement, much more can be involved. Negotiations are not likely to make much progress as long as one side believes that the fulfillment of the basic human needs is being threatened by the other. The second one would be make a list. To sort out the various interests of each side, it helps them to write them down as they occur to you. This will not only help you to remember them, it will also enable you to improve the quality of your assessment as you will learn new information and to place interest in their estimated order of importance. The next one would be talking about interest. The purpose of negotiating is to serve your interest. The chance of that happening increases when you communicate them. The other side may not know what your interests are, and you may not know theirs. So if you want the other side to take your interests into account, explain to them what those interests are. The next one would be make your interests come alive. It is your job to have the other side understand exactly how important and legitimate your interests are. Concrete details not only make your description credible, they also add impact. Inviting the other side to correct me if I'm wrong shows your openness. And if they do not correct you, it implies that they accept your description of the situation. Part of the task of impressing the other side with your interest lies in establishing the legitimacy of those interests. You need to convince them that they might well feel the same way if they were in your shoes. Acknowledge their interests as part of your problem. People listen better if they feel that you have understand them. So if you want the other side to appreciate your interests, begin by demonstrating that you appreciate theirs. In addition to demonstrating that you have understood their interests, it helps to acknowledge that their interests are part of the overall problem that you are trying to solve. Put the problem before your answer. If you want someone to listen and understand your reasoning, give your interest and reasoning first, and your conclusions or proposals later. Look forward, not back. If two people disagree with each other over some issue and neither party is seeking for agreement or is even trying to influence the other, the answer will typically identify a cause, not a purpose. One looks backward for a cause and treats our behavior as determined by prior events. The other looks forward for a purpose and treats our behavior as subject to our free will. We can choose to look back or to look forward. Be concrete but flexible. To avoid having to make a difficult decision on what to settle for, people will often go to a negotiation with no other plan than to sit down with the other side and see what they offer or demand. To convert your interests to concrete options, think in terms of more than one option that meets your interest. To keep your flexibility, treat each option you formulate as simply illustrative. The last one will be hard on the problem, soft on the people. If they feel personally threatened by an attack on the problem, they may grow defensive and may cease to listen. This is why it is important to separate the people from the problem. Show them that you are attacking the problem, not them. Go even further and be personally supportive. Listen to them with respect, express your appreciation for their time and effort, and emphasize their concern, and so on.
For this next chapter, we will talk about inventing options for mutual gain. A good negotiator will always have the skill to invent options that both sides find amicable. This skill is what can differentiate between a good neighbor and the bad one. Oftentimes, however, it can be difficult to please both parties, because in a dispute, people usually believe that they know the right answer. The answer to these disputes usually lies along a straight line between their position and that of the opponents, which brings us to our first part, the diagnosis. Here, there are four major obstacles that inhibit the invention of options. These include premature judgment, which is when other people's preconceived judgment hinders imagination and invention. Searching for a single answer, which is when people do not see inventing new options as an alternative, and instead focus on narrowing the gap between positions. The assumption of a fixed pie, which is when each side sees the situation as either or, and thinking that solving their problem is their problem, which is when each side is only concerned with its own immediate interests. Next, we have prescription. The first step to this is to separate inventing from deciding. Because judgment hinders imagination, we need to separate the process to think up possible decisions before we decide. We can do this through a process called brainstorming, which makes up 3 stages: before, during, and after. Before brainstorming, we want to define our purpose, choose only a few participants, and change up the environment with an informal atmosphere. And remember to choose a facilitator. During the brainstorming session, we first need to establish ground rules and then have participants face the problem all whilst recording any potential ideas. After the brainstorming session, we want to pick out the best ideas, invent ways to make it better and more realistic, and drop a selective and improved list of ideas. We can also choose to brainstorm with the other side, which might prove valuable in some cases. Even after we separate inventing from deciding, the process of brainstorming operates on the assumption that we are looking for one best answer. At this stage of the negotiation, however, we may instead want to embrace many different ideas and choose among the most suitable of them. Lastly, we need to multiply options by shuttling between the specific and the general, which brings us to the next part, which will be explained by my colleague.
So I'm going to explain to you about circle chart, which is 4 basic steps in inventing options. So the first step is to analyze what's the problem in the real world, what's wrong with the problem, what's the current symptoms, and what are the disliked facts, etc. The second one would be to analyze it, diagnose the problem, sort the symptoms to categories, suggest the causes, and observe what is lacking in theory. So the key question would be what is wrong? And the step 3 is the approach of what might be done, the possible strategies, some theoretical cures, and generate ideas. And the last step is the action of the idea. So what can be done, what might be done, and what are the steps to be taken in order to combat the problem. So there are also other key aspects to keep in mind, which is to look through the eyes of the different experts. So to generate multiple options. The second thing to keep in mind is to invent agreements of different strengths. So you can multiply the number of possible agreements on the table by thinking of other weaker versions, which I'm going to elaborate further in the next slide. So these adjectives below suggest the potential agreements of different strengths. So a stronger version of an agreement would be substantive, and it's permanent, and it's comprehensive, final, unconditional, binding, and first order. And a weaker version of the agreement would be procedural, provisional, partial in principle, contingent, non-binding, and second order. Okay, so other key aspects to keep in mind would be to change the scope of the proposed agreement. Not only the strength of the agreement, but also its scope. Also to look for mutual gain by identifying shared interest, because apart from avoiding joint loss, there almost always exists a possibility of a joint gain. So, and the last one would be to dovetail different interests, because differences can also lead to a solution and eventually to an agreement.
Next, change the scope of a proposed agreement. Look for mutual gain and identify shared interests. Stressing your shared interests can make the negotiation smoother and more amicable. Passengers in a lifeboat afloat in the middle of the ocean with limited rations will subordinate their differences over food in the pursuit of their shared interest in getting to shore. Many creative agreements reflect this principle of reaching agreement through differences. Difference in interests and belief make it possible for an item to be a high benefit to you, yet low cost for the other side. One party cares more about form, economic considerations, internal considerations, while other cares about sometimes political considerations and external. In addition to the content of the decision you would like them to make, you will want to consider from their point of view the consequences of following that decision. If you were they, what results will you most fear? What would you hope for? We often try to influence others by threats and warnings about what will happen if they don't decide as we would like. They can expect if they do decide as you wish, and on improving those aware of the consequences. They can expect if they do decide as you wish, and on improving those consequences from their point of view. I think that's all from us, Group 7. Thank you very much for your attentions, and have a good day.